Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 4th of February of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. First we're going to start with the Kupiansk-Lyman Frontline, with this area. I believe that these days Kupiansk-Lyman Frontline is the most active and the most interesting frontline in this special military operation. First of all, we're going to start with the north part, with the Kupiansk area. Today, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of previous 24 hours clashes, the Russians managed to push the Ukrainians from the town by the name of Dvorichne, this one. The Russians managed to enter, and I believe that this is the first sign of that fact that the Russians started counter-offensive operation on the north in direction of Kupiansk. This Dvorichne is very interesting, and this area is very interesting for many reasons. And first of all, if we compare two maps, the Russian sources map and the Western source map, we're going to see a lot of differences in this area. If we take a look at this map, you're going to see the town by the name of Dvorichne, Gryannikovka, Первый Liman, Sinkovka. All these towns are under Ukrainian control. The towns like Tavlazhanka, Gorbovka, Vilshana is in the gray zone, and Tokarevka and Pershatravneva is in the gray zone, and the Russians control their area started somewhere in Dobrolyubovka, Veliki Veselok, and so on. If we take a look at the Russian sources map, you're gonna see a completely different picture, and the Russians are saying that they control Tavlazhanka, Gorbivka, Vilshina, Pershatravneva. So Tavlazhanka, Gorbivka, Vilshina, Pershatravneva, according to the Russian sources map, is under Russian control. So let's update this map just for better understanding about this situation. So this is the area, according to the Russian sources, is under Russian control. And today the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of offensive operation in direction of Dvorichne, they managed to enter the eastern outskirts of this town, and that they managed to push the Ukrainians back. I understand that the Russians reached the railroad if they were attacking from the east, or maybe they reached the river if they were attacking from the north, or something like this. I believe that by this morning the Ukrainians still controlled a part of this area, but I believe that maybe tomorrow we're going to receive update that the entire town was taken by the Russians. And this is a very important area, and I will try to explain to you what is the importance of this area and what is going on there. First of all, if we take a look at the disposition map, you're going to see that this area is under responsibility of 14th Mechanized Brigade. So this is their main area. They're located in Dvorichne and Kupiansk, so this is some kind of secure brigade. That main goal of this brigade is to secure the flanks of 92nd Mechanized Brigade and Territory Defense Brigade like 103rd and the 109th in their mission to storm Novoselovskaya, or these days to stop the Russians' counter-offensive operation. So 14th Mechanized Brigade is the key brigade in this area. But there is something wrong with this brigade. I'll try to explain to you. If you remember, a few videos ago I told you that the Russians started hunting over this brigade. They were trying to get this brigade to attack, and almost every single day the Russians were reporting about the fact that they spot this brigade in this or that town, that they deal a massive damage to this brigade, and so on. If you have access to my table, if you're able to follow this table, you're gonna see that the Russians in this year started attacking this brigade somewhere in the middle of January, somewhere on the 14th of January. The Russians started hunting this brigade. It was Saturday of 14th of January, and as you can see, according to this line, they were reporting that they were attacking this brigade almost every single day. In town like Dvorichne, Berestove, Dvorichne, Novoselovskaya, Berestove, Dvorichne. So as you can see, the Russians were ruining this Dvorichne starting from the 14th of January of 2023. Another town, Sinkovka, if you take a look at this map, Sinkovka, Novoselovska, Sinkovka. So when talking about the map, this is the towns, Dvorichne, and this is Sinkovka, Первый Liman, Masyukovka, Vilshana. So the Russians were attacking this area heavily since the middle part of this month. But when we follow this table, you're gonna see that that the 1st of February was the last day when the Russians included any information about attacks against 14th Mechanized Brigade. And there are 3 days in a row when we haven't received any update about any attacks against this brigade. To tell the truth, I believe that this brigade was completely destroyed by the Russians, and the Ukrainians were forced to replace this brigade or move this brigade from the front line. This brigade was under very heavy fire, and as a result of that, as a result of maybe negative, I don't know how to call it, not very good rotation process or something like this, the Russians started counter-offensive operation because they know that the main enemy, the 14th Brigade in this area, were completely defeated, and as a result of the attack they entered Vuhledar. And I believe that the Russians will try to develop their offensive operation, and they will try to move along the Oskol River in direction of Kupiansk. So why is this so important? As we discussed many times, there is a back in Siversk. There is a possible cauldron in Siversk. There is a possible cauldron in Bakhmut. When talking about the number of Ukrainian forces on this bridgehead, I believe that there are maybe 50-70,000 of Ukrainian soldiers in this area. And there is a lot of chances and possibilities for the Russians to encircle big groups of Ukrainian army. And to encircle, let's say, Siversk, the Russians need to develop something on Lyman bridgehead. To develop something on Lyman bridgehead, they need to develop something on Kupiansk. So everything starts on Kupiansk front line. And the Russians started their movement. When talking about Kupiansk, it's also very important area. As we discussed, there is a railroad that moves to Svatova, and further this railroad moves to the south to Lysychansk and Severodonetsk. And if the Russians are able to push the Ukrainians as far as possible from this railroad, the Russians will be able to restore the support and supplies processes on this railroad, and of course they will feel themselves much more better. Okay, now the Russians are pushing. And furthermore, if you remember, during these months there were a lot of updates about some clashes in small farm Masyukovka in this area. So the Russians, as I told you, will try to push the Ukrainians and to force them to cross the Oskol River, and they will try to move and develop their offensive operation in the direction of Kupiansk. And I believe that these months, in February, maybe we are going to see the battle for Kupiansk, or at least for its eastern part. So maybe the Russians are not planning to cross the river or to attack from Belgorod in this direction. So maybe the western part of Kupiansk will remain under Ukrainian control, but the eastern part, I believe that the Russians are going to take this territory back. When talking about the area, let's say on Lyman Frontline, today we have a lot of updates from this area as well. As you can see, there is AK-47 icons, and these icons are very far from the Russian controlled territory. So there are all these icons goes along Zhiribets River, and the Russians started their counter-offensive operation in this area. The attacks all over the front line, to be more precise, all over the river, Zhiribets River. As a result of those clashes, the Ukrainian lost more than 100 soldiers in this area. Not just more than 100, yet hundreds of soldiers were killed during this counter-offensive operation. The Ukrainians are moving more and more reserves in direction of Terny in the middle part, using these small bridges and small roads from crossing the Zhiribets River. The Russians, when talking about the Russians, the main forces in this area are 144th motorized division Russian, and their attack in direction of Terny. And this map is not updated, but some Russian sources are saying that the Russians has already reached the vicinities of Tarskoy, Yampolovka, of Terny, of Nevska and Makeevka. So they're like on the outskirts of this town, and I believe that they will increase the pressure and they will try to penetrate and to break through this area, because as we discussed, if the Russians want to establish control over Lyman, and Lyman is the focal point of the Russians, Drobyshevo, Lyman, Yampol, this is the main towns that the Russians need to take control over. And if the Russians want to get them, the best way to do this is to attack from the north. And to attack from the north, first they need to establish some kind of protection from the north, and then to attack from the north in direction of the south. When talking about the Dibrova, the Russian pushes in direction of the south. They're pushing the Ukrainians back to to the Seversky Donetsk River. Furthermore, if you remember, yesterday we discussed about the situation in Belogorovka. The Ukrainians took a decision to step back, but today the Russian sources provided the real picture in this town. If you take a look at deployment map, you're gonna see that this area, Dibrova, is under responsibilities of 81st Air Mobile Brigade, and today some Russian sources are saying that this brigade was completely defeated and completely destroyed, or at least some, let's call it some company of soldiers were destroyed in this area, and the Russians are saying that as a result of clashes during the previous days in this area, the Ukrainians 81st Air Mobile Brigade lost around 160 soldiers. When talking about the Russians, they're finishing the clearing process in this area, and I believe that the next day, within the next few days, they will be able to start offensive operation or movements in direction of Grigorievka. They will be able to activate their movements in direction of Verkhnyokamyanskaya, and so on. So as you can see, the Russians are trying to push, press, hold on, to pin down, to freeze Ukrainian forces in Siversk, and of course they want to encircle this town as fast as possible and to collapse, destroy as much as possible Ukrainians on these front lines. When talking about the South Soledar area, as you can see, there are no icons. That it doesn't mean that there are no movements. The Russians, the previous 24 hours, were attacking in direction of Razdolovka, Veselaya, Vasyukovka and Fyodorovka, but the Ukrainians have prepared they had enough time in the past. There was like 2-3 weeks passed since the Soledar fell. The Ukrainians started creation some kind of fortifications. I believe that now there are some fortifications, and the Russians are a little bit slowed down in this area. Now they're attacking Veselaya, Razdolovka. They need time to reduce these fortifications till ruins, and after that they will be able to continue movements in direction of Zvanovka, in direction of Siversk. Furthermore, but I'll repeat one more time, now the most interesting and the most important part is Lyman Frontline, because the Russians are moving there and they will try to encircle and to get Seversky Donetsk River from the north. Maybe we are going to see another crossing of this river. I don't remember when the Russians for the last time were crossing this river. The last time the Russians crossed this river, they were defeated completely. If you remember, they were trying to cross the last year in the vicinity of Dronovka in this area, and also they were crossing this area in this small back. I believe they want to encircle Siversk. They need to do this one more time, and I believe that they need to do this somewhere in the vicinity of Ozerno, Dibrova, Yampol, somewhere here. But don't forget that the Ukrainians deployed 77th Brigade in the vicinity of Alexandrovka for these purposes, not to allow the Russians to feel free and safe on this side of Seversky Donetsk River. So we're going to see a lot of stories, a lot of battles along this river during the next months, and these battles for Siversk will determine the situation on the Ukrainian front lines for many months ahead. When talking about Bakhmut, as you can see, the Russians still try to establish control over Krasnaya Gora, over Paraskovyevka, but for now they are not able to do this. The Ukrainians do have possibilities to send more and more reserves in this direction. They are holding the Russians' pressure, and they're doing some kind of counter-offensive operation furthermore. So maybe this is the reason why the Russians decided to change their focus, and during the previous 24 hours the Russians were mainly concentrated on this part of Bakhmut. The Russians, as you know, the Russians during the previous weeks established control over the northwest part of Bakhmut, over this area. So this territory, if you remember, is under Russian control. So that allows the Russians to secure the flanks, and I believe they crossed this Bakhmut river and entered this small part. This small block has the title Stupki, so this is the title of this block, local title. And as you can see, if we compare these two blocks like Krasnaya Gora, Paraskovyevka with this block Stupki, it doesn't matter what area to take. Furthermore, I believe that if the Russians are able to develop their offensive operation in the direction of Yagidne, this one, it is even better than to take control over the northern part, because when talking about this, there are still supply road, this one, to support forces in Bakhmut from the north, but if the Russians are able to take control over this Black Stupki, they will cut and will still have physical control over the north support line, and it will reduce the Ukrainian possibilities, and it will be some kind of, let's say, 80% tactical encirclement or something like this. Furthermore, the Russians are pushing from the west. They're trying to develop their offensive operation. They're attacking from the south. And when talking about the southeast part of Bakhmut, about this area, this morning, so we can say that this morning started with update that the Russians had very heavy clashes, and there was a real fight for this road. I'm not sure where exactly the Russians are right now, but they reported, I'm telling you as I read it in the morning updates, that there were clashes for this road. So I believe that the Russians were across this forest and they reached this road and they had a physical contact with this road. So it's very interesting. So I believe that within the next few days we are not going to see the establishing control over this town Ivanovska, but using this forest, Russians will be able to create some kind of fortifications in this forest. They will be able to clear this forest from mines, and there is local roads that the Russians are able to use to supply and support this group, and they will just block this N32 road from the west. And it's almost the same as to take Ivanovska under Russian control, so it doesn't matter. Furthermore, the Russians were attacking Ivanovska as well. So I can say that there is a very high chances that by the end of the next week we are going to see a real encirclement of Bakhmut, where the north part will be completely blocked and encircled, the southeast part will be completely blocked and encircled, and this road will be under complete fire control, where the Ukrainians are going to have losses higher than 60 or 70%. So it's already encirclement. The only thing that Ukrainians are going to have in this situation is just to start evacuation process, immediate evacuation process. So when talking about, one more time, when talking about Kupiansk-Lyman Frontline, the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours lost around 130 soldiers, around 11 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems, 1 Grad, another D-30 howitzer. When talking about Donetsk area, the Ukrainian lost around 60 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles and 3 artillery systems, Stab B, Akatse, and another multiple rocket launch system, Grad. Now we're moving to South Donetsk area. As you can see, there are a lot of icons as well. The Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours, the Russians destroyed 2 raiders, one INTPQ-36, another one INTPQ-15. Furthermore, the Russians managed to destroy 35 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems. The Russians reported that they destroyed at least 1 ammo depot in the vicinity of Vuhledar, and this area is very interesting as well. Today, the Russians sources start publishing the videos and information about the first attempt of storming of Vuhledar, and they reported that a lot of Russian soldiers were captured by the Ukrainians. The thing was like, first, the weather was fine for storm of Vuhledar. The Russians could use air intelligence, drones, aircrafts to attack and so on. And they started movement to the north, and as you can see, they established control over this residential area from the east, from the north, from the west, from the east, and so on. They developed on these fields, took some hills and some checkpoints and so on. But then the Russians are saying that Ukrainians managed to deploy some reserves, and they started counter-offensive operation, counter-fire with tanks from hidden position and so on, and the Russians start having very big losses. And there was a period of time when some Russian forces managed to create some bridgehead in this residential area. They managed to establish control, but they were cut from the main forces. So there were no safe road between, let's say, the residential area in the south and the residential area in the north. So this area maybe was taken by the Ukrainians. Maybe they managed to attack from the north in direction of the southeast, and they managed to cut. So we can say that there was maybe a day or maybe 2 when the forces on this northern area were encircled by the Ukrainians. And The situation was very difficult because at some point of time the Russians are saying that they were completely out of ammo and out of bullets, out of everything, and there was only one way, just to surrender or die or something like this. But then, if you remember, I told you, we discussed many times that the Russians were saying that the weather became very bad. And the thing is that there were fog in this area, and that fog allowed the Russians to move some ammo, some equipment, some reserves, some manpower in the vicinity of this residential area, and that helped the Russians to survive another few days. But later the Ukrainians and the Russians reported that a lot of Russians were captured. Now I'm not sure about their destiny, what is going on with them. But anyway, these days the Russians continue moving more and more reserves in the vicinity of this area on Vuhledar, and I believe that we need to expect another attack, another attempt to storm this area. And as I understand, Vuhledar is a part of greatest offensive operation of Russian plan of greatest offensive operation. And I believe that this is the key region. Everybody understand this, and the Ukrainians and the Russians. And this is the Russians, I believe they will pay a very high price for this town, but I believe that the value that this town are able to bring for big Russian plan is very big. So that's why they're not planning to stop, and they will continue pushing, because this Vuhledar opens the road to Kurakhova, and the most important, to Pokrovsk, and to encircle all Ukrainian group around Donetsk city. When talking about South Donetsk and Zaporozhye area, the Ukraine lost 35 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems. When talking about Kherson district, there were artillery duels mainly. The Ukrainian lost 1 ammo depot in this area and 1 artillery system Grad, and that's it. So as you can see, the Russians started. And also another interesting update when talking about the report of Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. Now today they're saying about 5 front lines, tomorrow about 4, and so on. But as we discussed, according to the Ministry of Defense, there are Kupiansk front line. According to the Ministry of Defense, there is Kupiansk Frontline, Lyman Frontline, Donetsk Frontline, South Donetsk Frontline, Zaporozhye Frontline, and Kherson Frontline. And if you're able to read the Ministry of Defense report, they're saying that there is offensive operation on Kupiansk Frontline, there is offensive operation on Lyman Frontline, there is offensive operation on Donetsk Frontline, and there is no offensive operation in South Donetsk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. So just the northwest, northeast part of these front lines are in offensive state, and the rest of Russian territory, Russian army is in defense state, or maybe they're preparing before something very big. But to do something very big, they need to take first Vuhledar. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.